Hello, everyone. My name is Annette Sandler. I'm the Director of Live Content at AVIXA, and welcome to the January Conferencing and Collaboration Power Hour. This is where corporate technology managers and integrators can get the latest on key developments and trends for the digital workplace. Today, we're talking about how the future of collaboration is here. This webinar is brought to you by our series sponsor, BlueJeans, and our moderator today is Pete Koman, Chief Technology Officer at PTS. Pete will start us off with a short presentation of where we are with collaboration technology currently, and then invite our panelists to weigh in. Before I hand the presentation over to Pete, there are a few housekeeping items. For those viewing live, today's webinar qualifies for 1 CTS, CTSD, and CTSI RU credit. Please allow 5 to 7 business days to view the credit on your transcripts. If you have any issues, please email us, webinars@avixa.org. During the webinar today, all attendees will be placed on mute. The event chat icon is the speech bubble on your right-hand sidebar, and that's where you can communicate with all attendees. Please introduce yourself in the event chat and let us know where you're joining us from today. Are you in the office or are you working from home? Personally, I am working from home today. If you have questions for the panel, please enter those into the Q&A window where your fellow attendees can like and upvote their favorite questions. The Q&A icon is the last icon on your right-hand sidebar. We'll take audience questions after the panel discussion. Finally, you'll have access to this recorded webinar at avixa.org/webinars within about 5 business days. That's all I have, and now I'll hand things over to Pete.
G'day everyone, I'm Pete Techman Coman from PTS, People Technology Space, and I'm here today to moderate The Future of Collaboration is Here. I'd like to thank AVIXA and BlueJeans for the opportunity to moderate this panel. So first of all, I'd like to talk about pre-COVID and what our workspaces look like. We already had a high degree of integration. We used a lot of technology to collaborate and meet with people. Some of us had flexible work arrangements, and we were designing smaller, more flexible workspaces and meeting spaces. And as we all know, last year, all that was flipped on its head. This is post-COVID. Parents juggling families, working from home, quite often in cramped, small conditions. But it's not ideal for working. We also saw people start to share their lives, share their homes with the rest of the world, introducing their family members, kids, pets, and giving an insight to how these people actually live. 2020 also saw the most used phrase, "You're on mute." So as we look to the future, how are we going to design these spaces? What is a collaboration space actually going to look like? Obviously, things have changed, and suddenly we now need to start designing around touchless environments. People being afraid to actually share common platforms or touch common platforms that are in use with other people. Cleaning regimes need to be put into place to ensure that the spread of COVID is not accelerated. So what does a touchless environment look like? Will voice have anything to do with that? Will we see voice assistants be deployed into the workplace to try and create this touchless workplace? And along with touchless, we also have touchless. So one-touch meeting joins, for example, which were already being deployed, pre-COVID. I think we'll start to see an acceleration of that once we start to return to the workplace. And will we see usage of our own personal devices to control collaboration spaces and meeting rooms? And what about audio-visual devices sitting on the network? Will that also increase? Will we see more or less equipment being deployed into a typical meeting space? Will we see more or less people bringing BYO devices? And will we see more or less wireless sharing being deployed as people are more afraid to actually touch cables that are being shared with others? And a technology that I'm excited about is augmented reality. So will we start to see augmented reality being deployed in the workplace to allow users to collaborate anytime, anywhere by sharing content on glasses such as these without the need for a dedicated space? Well, all these questions and more are going to be answered by our esteemed panel that we've assembled today, starting with Dawn Mead. She's a CTS and the Senior AV Solutions Architect at Northrop Grumman. She's an AV professional and blogger, writer, podcaster on tech topics. Welcome to the panel, Dawn.
Thank you so much for having me.
You'll be very busy with all those titles there, it sounds like.
I try.
Next on the panel, we have Nick Nienaber. And Nick is head of, Nick Neighbor. I should apologize for that, Nick. Nick is head of audiovisual at WeWork. Welcome to the panel, Nick.
Thank you very much, Peter. No worries. That's closer than most people get when they give it a shot. Thank you.
The next panel member is someone who a lot of you will be very familiar with, albeit without chutney today, is Sharath Abraham, also a CTS, and Sharath is the engineering manager at AVI SBL. So welcome, Sharath.
Thanks for having me. And yeah, like I said earlier, I tried to get chutney, but unfortunately she was booked.
Not a problem, Sharath. And finally, we have Rob Woods, and Rob is the Senior Sales Engineer at Blue Jeans by Verizon. So thanks again, Rob, for your time and for joining the panel.
Happy to do it. Appreciate the opportunity.
So the first question that I have for the panel is the future of collaboration here? And have your technology wish lists being fulfilled? Dawn, can we start with you?
Sure. I would say yes and no. The future of collaboration is here. In the past year, as we all saw, the use of collaboration has exploded just in a 1 month period at the beginning of last year. Sorry, Rob, but Zoom's numbers went up by like 2.5 million subscribers just in a 1 month period. And that doesn't include other great services like Blue Jeans, like Webrtc, like any number of other things. And that doesn't include hard codecs. So I think it's not even so much the future of collaboration is here as the awareness and the excitement about collaboration that just hasn't existed previously. As for tech wish lists, there's always something new and shiny I want. So I don't think we can ever say that all of our technology wish lists are fulfilled.
Thank you, Dawn. Nick, what about yourself?
Yeah, I agree with Dawn. I think, again, with respect to Blue Jeans, I think 2020 is the year that we saw Zoom actually become a verb, not just a sort of a poorly understood unified communications platform. Yeah, I mean, my perspective on this is that the future of collaboration, what we're all sort of pushing towards is this hybrid model that allows people to work from where they want, whether that's home or an office space. We've had all the tools we actually need to do that for some time. What happened is a change in circumstances that made that a requirement instead of a nice to have. So while I'm always curious about sort of what's next on the horizon, I'm also skeptical of that because I've already seen so many very useful technologies implemented very poorly. I would prefer that we get it, right in this time rather than push forward what's next.
Gotcha. And Sharath, what about yourself? Is the future of collaboration here, and have your technology wish lists been fulfilled?
I think the future collaboration, it has been here. We have all just been now forced to use it. Just speaking in working in an office space before, I barely collaborated with anyone outside of my floor. And now we're all on Teams or Zoom or Slack or all the multiple Amplitude collaboration tools. Everyone's kind of forced to talk to people within that tool set now, and everyone's forced to use the camera in their house. And then like Dawn has, people are now looking into microphones in their homes, right? Because everyone started realizing how audio is very important, clarity is very important. So people are now actually looking up Shure mics or who was a leader in microphones. In terms of future tech, the AV industry, for me per se, also just in collaboration wise, we're still at the very early onset of getting into AR. I mean, the most use of AR I've seen is when Pokemon Go was out, and it's still out. So I think that feature should be utilized in the future, which I'm excited about, like as you mentioned, artificial augmented realities.
Cool. Thanks. And Rob, what about yourself? What do you think?
I think it's an evolution, right? It's never one and done. So over the years, we've seen it be the future is always here at this time. But it is a constant evolution, and that dictates people's wish lists. You know, you give somebody a new shiny toy, and they're going to say, "Oh, this is great. How can I make it better? What can this do?" Those sort of things. But I will say, absolutely, 2020 threw everybody for a curve, and that really included the service providers, whether it's Zoom, WebEx, BlueJeans, Microsoft Teams, all of these different cloud-based conferencing or communications providers all had a significant uptick in their utilization and user base. So I would say absolutely. I think it's here now, and it is very much a moving needle where, you know, what might not be here in, 2 months. Come 2 months, you're going to have to move the goal sticks or the first down marker, as a U.S. Football fan goes. So it's this concept of it's an evolution.
Gotcha. And in Dawn, how would you describe the transformation of collaboration technologies over the past 12 months? Would you say that's an evolution or a revolution?
I think it's for some people a revolution because they'd never used it before. For those of us that have been in the industry, those of us that have used it even on a limited basis, it's definitely evolved to, I think Nick said, it went from being a need to have to a need to have. Suddenly, if you don't have collaboration of some sort or multiple channels of collaboration, then you're going to have a lot of problems getting your business affairs taken care of in this environment. I'm working from home. I got people in different countries and different cities that are all trying to work both from home and in the office, trying to keep in touch with people on these or on these. And, without the right tools, and we've had the right tools, but the utilization and the interconnectivity of those tools, it's really evolving as we go. And, I mentioned this to our COVID task force at my company over the past few months. We're making this up as we go along, folks. There is no best practice for COVID remote communications and remote work on the scale that we're seeing. So there's a lot of, you're going to trip and fall, and then you're going to pick yourself up and learn from that experience and figure the next thing out. But for the folks new to collaboration, haven't touched this before, it's definitely a revolution. But for the rest of us, it's evolving, and it's evolving quickly.
And Rob, with this increase of soft codecs that we're seeing, I mean, we're seeing a huge rise in the deployment of these platforms. With your background, I mean, you work for BlueJeans, you used to work for Polycom. With all this growth, do you think that a hardware-based codec still has a place in meeting spaces?
Absolutely. I mean, it always will have a place, whether it's a micro PC or Mac Mini or a hardware-based codec from the manufacturers like Poly or Cisco or whoever. It will always be in those meeting spaces. So whether it's in a software format or in a traditional locked-out format where it's incompatible. Everybody's compatible with everybody these days, but incompatible, I think it's always going to be.
Okay. And Sharath, with all these, we have so many unified communications platforms at our disposal these days. I mean, are we ever going to see truly interoperable UCC systems or UC systems?
That all depends on how loud end users and clients give feedback to all these companies, right? Because I can go back to Cisco, I can go back to Polycom, I can go back to Crestron and say, hey, somebody come up with a solution where I walk in and it doesn't matter what I have, I just want to make a call to my team. It really depends on how much feedback users of every company push back on that. Are there solutions out there? Yeah. Can we provide the solutions? Yeah. But then the matter of budget comes up into play, right? So it's a constant conversation you would have with the end user and the clients and understand what their actual needs are. Can we get away from just walking into our collaboration space and use my phone? Because that would be the easiest thing ever, to just utilize what I'm walking with all the time. Is there a cost associated with that? Most likely. So it's like I said, it's an evolution of conversation that happens with your needs as a client. But I think the bigger companies have had the conversations, but there's no fire under their butt, as I would say, to move forward with that solution.
Okay. And what are your thoughts, Dawn? Do you think we'll see interoperable UC systems?
I believe so. I hope so. As an end user designing for multiple sites around the world, and and it's not just matching our sites, my site here in this part of the country to my site over there. It's also dealing with our customers, our external customers, and that goes back to the last question: why the hard codec's not going away? Certain customers, certain secured networks, both in government, defense, finance, healthcare. Anyone that needs any kind of hard encryption. You soft codec guys are great. You do wonderful work. You even have, Zoom for Gov, and I'm sure BlueJeans and Teams and everybody else has their encrypted version, but you can only sell the certain clients with the safety of cloud to a point, So there's always going to be a place for hard codec. We need to have interoperability in order to, if I'm spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on one codec or one soft codec solution in my enterprise, and one of our government partners has spent millions of dollars on a different solution, and one of our competimates, as we call them, our friendly competitors that we're partnering with on a major initiative as a third option, we need to be able to talk to each other. Mm-hmm. And, in this day and age, we can't afford to be getting on a plane and flying everyone together, even if that was financially feasible. Just from the pandemic sense, we can't do that. Mm-hmm. So if you're listening, manufacturers, please let us collaborate together. Let's interoperate.
And from a client side, Nick, just on that, so it sounds like the panel is saying that they believe that some sort of hardware is required in the space. With WeWork, do you guys have PCs in the meeting spaces to deliver your video conferencing?
No, not currently. To be perfectly candid, delivering video conferencing for members at WeWork has been a challenge that I've been trying to solve for several years, and it has everything to do with what Dawn, Sharath, and Rob already touched on. Security is a factor, privacy is a factor, and in a typical WeWork space, from 1 hour to the next, the occupant and the user of that space could be anybody. They could be direct competitors. The example that we've used a couple times in the past is we have one location in Washington, D.C., where both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party have members in that space. So all of the assumptions that make an enterprise class system really good and really easy to use all go by the wayside in my locations. So no, we don't is the short answer, and that has everything to do with security and with management and with monitoring. I think Rob made a really good point that, we have a mental division between soft codec and hard codec. It doesn't account for the fact that a PC is still hardware. One of the benefits to buying hard codec from Cisco or Polycom or Lifesize is they come with enterprise level management, monitoring, and maintenance software tools that you can then apply at scale. Doing that with Windows and with Mac, it's getting there, but it's significantly more challenging than it's given credit for.
But what about supporting BYOD devices? So I come in, obviously with the environment that you work in there at WeWork, people are bringing in all sorts of devices, and they want to have conferencing calls, and they have the codec on their device. and they want to share it within the space, share it. And I mean, how are you treating that? Are you supplying cameras and microphones that they can connect to? How does that work?
Well, right now we're not. We're entering into some pilots for a couple different ways to do this right, and some of them are what we would call a hosted system, which is effectively a room that we build out with a partner like BlueJeans or Cisco or Zoom. And in those cases, obviously, right, the interoperability is limited to your platform selection. So we're trying that, and we are trying some pure BYOD, or what we would call DIY, too many acronyms, which is effectively a USB peripheral, right? The problem there is that, as I imagine everyone listening knows, with pure USB peripherals, most of the errors that you run into are user error. And in the case of a space where I have charged you for access to the space before you arrived, if you show up and you can't get your meeting started, it doesn't matter if it's your fault or my fault, I still have to refund you that money. So that comes with staffing issues, and especially since most USB peripherals don't give you any way to remotely monitor or manage unless it's connected to compute. So short answer, we're trying just about everything. We haven't really landed on a great solution yet. There's a few that I think are just on the horizon that will be good, but none of them are quite mature enough yet.
Gotcha. And Sharath, I mean, to facilitate one-touch meeting join at the moment, like I mean, in a past life, you worked at Crestron, and they had worked closely with a number of manufacturers of UCC platforms. In that instance, to have one touch, we required a PC in the room. I mean, do you think that organizations like a Crestron would be able to somehow build in or allow you to install codecs on the touchscreen rather than having that PC, and potentially eliminate these security issues that we've been talking about?
Yeah, I think the rise of the AV world, actually, manufacturers coming out with APIs recently, I've seen a lot more come out these days, provides more of a playing field to provide that option, right? Because now you have a set of instructions on how to add the join meeting button, right? Because APIs is the same language just about most companies, right? Do this, do that, this happens. Do this, do that, this happens. So I think in addition to that, you can get away with utilizing something like a virtual machine that's on a server somewhere that talks to all these endpoints, right? So now you have a server, but now we just got real complicated, right? If I'm in a room and I mention a virtual machine to someone, they're like, I don't know about that, right? So now that's the other question, is how many people are actually spending time to understand these technologies that have been available for so long, and now start incorporating them to AV world, because companies like Zoom, companies like BlueJeans, companies like Crestron, Polycom, everyone has their API, and if you look hard enough, you can find it. No one just has done it right now, right? So Crestron in itself, they have processors. Now they have virtual machines that can run where you don't need a hard processor. So why can't we do that same thing with a codec, right? So yeah, I think that same process will help in that.
Okay.
Yeah, and many of these companies out there also have the ability to use what's called proximity detection, right? Using the Bluetooth on your phone to, when you walk into a room, the room should be able to dictate or discover you and say, oh, this person has a meeting that's scheduled on their phone and this room is free at that time. Let's just send them an SMS or a notification to their phone saying, this room is free. Would you like to launch your meeting from this room? And that would be something as simple as, and this could limit the amount of touches to community devices, these touch panels, if you will. Everybody's got a phone or some sort of smart device in their pocket, and they could send an SMS message or an alert to their phone and touch here to start your meeting, and that meeting would just automatically join. But you take it another step further, and where more and more companies, when we get back to the office, are dictating, hey, we don't necessarily want you touching a screen that's a community screen. You should be able to walk into a room and have that meeting join like that because it detects you walking into that room. So those sort of things.
So just on that, Dawn, so as designers, I mean, you're a consultant, along with myself. Our goal is always to create a frictionless environment, but I mean, Rob touched on a few things there, but what's required to do that? How do we design and create that frictionless environment?
Well, I mean, there are a couple of different factors you have to think about. At the end of the day, the number one thing anybody in the AV industry or technology industry needs to remember is we're people. We're people trying to communicate with people. So you have to pay attention to people factors. How, what are their preferences? What are their abilities? What are their interests? What do they want the room to do? I've said this even when I was still an integrator. Nobody wants to buy your gray and black boxes. We don't care. We want an experience. We want to be able to communicate. We want to be able to share our thoughts. And you're just the tools making it happen. So that's the important thing, to make it frictionless, to make it touchless. There are so many different options, as Rob said, your Bluetooth, or there were some RFID tags that several of the manufacturers had a couple years ago to Infocom. And those sorts of things are great where you can implement them. But from a security standpoint, once you get to a certain level of secure or closed or classified or whatever, those sorts of things we have to take off our Fitbits and leave our phones in a locker before we walk into a room, So those sorts of things, there are ways that you just have to remember to design around within your capabilities. So know what the people need and want out of their space, what their user experience will be, design for that, and then look at the external constraints, like what is your network constraints, what are your security constraints, what are your physical constraints, like do you have a drop ceiling or is it just open to the deck? Things like that. There's so many factors to take into consideration. But number one, it always comes back to the people, and then number two, their needs. It's simple as that.
And I think this is a great opportunity for all the listeners on this call. This is a perfect opportunity to provide the benefits of utilizing these systems to your management to get approval for the budget, right? Because everything we've said has been available in the last 5 years. RFID badging, walk into a room, start the meeting. Using your phone, walk in, start the meeting. This has been available, but now is the perfect time to show management that the technology that's been available, we should put that in the budget for this year, next year, right? Because if I talk about the coolest things to someone, they were like, well, how much does it cost? I don't think we really need that. Now they do need it. So for all the listeners on this call, now you can show the benefits of having RFID tagging, for your badges, using your phone for SMS texting, using occupancy sensor, using sensors in certain spaces. Now you can use this information that you've gained over the last year to create a report for your management to prove why it needs to be in the budget.
And not only that, go ahead.
I think the industry is now being moved even more by the end users, which is to I think everybody on this panel would agree to some extent. Whereas previously it was dictated by the IT organizations or the security organizations or the AV design teams that were inside those organizations, ask for what you want, take what you get. Well, now that the actual end users who are dealing with the user experience have a larger seat in a lot of situations are actually telling the IT and design teams what they want. And we're seeing that all the time at Blue Jeans right now.
And as I was going to say, to build on Shiraz's point, and even Rob's, is that, it's not just because we're at the beginning of the year and we're talking about budgets new. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and I don't know about your companies, but most of the major, big, huge corporations out there, and a lot of the smaller ones are saying, oh crap, what are we going to do? We have to figure this out. And suddenly they're open to listening to your technology suggestions in a way that they might not have been before. I've got 5 different products right now on my intranet site that are listed as COVID solutions. It's stuff that's been out for 5 or 6 years. It's stuff that the cool things we see at Infocom that we want to sell people, like, hey, I can use my cell phone as a microphone, then I don't have to pass around a mic in a meeting of 300 people. Stuff like that. Suddenly, when it was before, oh, that's cool, but we don't have budget for it, is, oh my God, we need to have a touch-free experience and we can't afford to spend people, spending all their time wiping things down every meeting. Let's look at that. Let's, use our emergency pandemic budget to pay for that. And we've got a lot of traction with that. So if you're listening and you're an integrator, look at what you have and have seen at Infocom that can be marketed that way, because let me tell you, folks are needing it.
Exactly. And Nick, who is best placed to be designing these systems, that these new systems, these frictionless, touchless systems that we're wanting to deploy?
I think it's so my answer to this is heavily guided by my experience at WeWork, but I think it needs to be an interdisciplinary team. I think that audio visual engineers have a serious place in this to make sure that the basic fundamentals of acoustics and audio pickup and audio reinforcement, viewing angles, sufficient brightness, all the stuff that we nerd out on all the time. You have to bring that perspective into the room, otherwise the room is not functional. But as far as the interfaces go and making them touch-free and making them a good user experience, which is something that Dawn touched on a couple answers ago, you need to have expertise outside of traditional AV. I think that UX designers, which are typically from software engineering, are really useful. And I think the best thing to do is to have everyone look at it at the same time. If you're retrofitting or if you're building a new room, get everyone with expertise, every stakeholder involved, as early as possible so that everyone's requirements and whatever conflicts might arise are understood early, because I think as a lot of AV professionals know, you're typically last in line to get that information. And by the time any conflict that you might have flagged has been flagged, the architect is telling you, sorry, we can't put a speaker there, or the designer is telling you, sorry, we already picked a credenza, so you don't get a rack in it, whatever it might be. The best approach isn't really about who's in the room. It's about when they're in the room. It's about making sure that all of that stuff is settled soon.
So they should be involved as early as possible in the project to make sure that they've got a seat at the table and that they have input into these important decisions. Could be telecommunications room sizes, or you mentioned like credenza sizes, power, data, lighting, all those things that audio-visual systems touch upon in the workplace.
Absolutely. And then to another point that Dawn made, networking engineers, people who can understand the amount of data that needs to be provided, how many drops, what type of cabling, how much PoE can it provide, what are the extra bits and bobs that you need to make that stuff happen. That's super important too. And to your point, Pete, it depends on the kind of project. If it's a retrofit, then a lot of what you can do for infrastructure is sort of limited by what was already built, right? But if you're building a new project, whether it's a new room, a new campus, whatever, you need to push to be involved as early as the layout phase and the site programming phase, because you may have insight on things like wayfinding and paging and white noise generation and all sorts of other systems that actually benefit from broader deployments rather than really focused deployments.
Yeah, and then to that point, I think if you are a company that wants everything but not necessarily not know what's out there, I think someone like you is where it comes into place, right? You and your company, where you understand the AV world, you understand the IT world, but you're also able to talk to the end user and really start pulling at what they're actually looking for, right? Because I always say Googling things is always good, but knowing what to Google is half the battle. So someone like you and your company would assist in that as well. Because me as a manufacturer, sometimes I'll provide, not a manufacturer, sorry, me as an integrator now, when I have clients, I provide information and it's like starting at the beginning, like, wait, what is that? Why didn't anyone ever tell me that? So the communication collaboration also starts with all of our groups, right? Blue Jeans, myself, Nick is the end user, Dawn, consult. Everybody needs to just talk to each other, because in this world, there's just so much technology out there, it's impossible to keep track of everything.
Yeah, and to that point, we're seeing a lot more of these solutions being on the network now, not just for control, but for transportation. And a lot of the time they're being deployed in banks, which are very, very secure environments, and therefore the level of network security is much higher than, your mum and pop shop down the road kind of thing. So that level of networking expertise needs to be a lot higher than ever before to deploy these systems, because what we've seen with a lot of our clients, they would just say, it's not going on our network. Unless you tick these boxes or give us this information, it's not touching our network.
And there's a trade-off there, though. There's a trade-off there, though, Pete. when you have these mom and pop shops, they might outsource their IT or network infrastructure to a third party where you're going, hey, we need these firewall ports opened up on the network to transport the data. And they're saying, how do we do that? Well, who handles your firewalls? Who handles your switches and routers? And then all of a sudden, that is an additional hurdle that you need to clear, whether it's as a hardware provider or as a software service provider, that you need to then inject this third party into that conversation. And those might not be the most friction-free opportunities, whereas a larger company typically has a lot of that expertise on staff, if you will.
But to that point, Rob, even in a larger company with all that expertise in-house, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a frictionless conversation, which is why I think that there's a lot to be said for what Pete just said about the level of expertise, right? It doesn't mean that you as an AV design engineer need to go and, get your CCNA, right? You don't need to fully understand all of these things. You do need to be able to speak the language, though, and you need to be able to communicate some basic concepts to someone who does have that expertise in a non-confrontational manner. You need to be able to say, we need this to work. This is the experience we're after, and this is the blocker. So how do we solve this? The traditional way that conversation has happened in basically every job I've had before this is AV guy says, we need this. Network guy says, you can't have this. That's the end of the conversation. But if you actually collaborate and work with people and build that relationship and that understanding, then there's, huge benefits to be gained there.
Yeah, and I will say, since I made the jump from being just an integrator, which, for 20 years, to becoming an end user internal consultant, I have learned more IT, more cybersecurity, more construction, and I thought I pretty much knew what was going on the build phase, but more construction, more of every of these trades and every of these groups that are invested in our projects. And often it falls to me even more than the project manager of the entire build to do the translating and to do the explaining and to sort of interface between them. A lot of times my facilities project managers will come to me and say, hey, Dawn, can you explain this to me, or can you tell me why we need that, or can you talk to them and make sure everything's cool? So right on, Nick.
So just on that, we're seeing these, when we're trying to create a frictionless environment, a lot of that friction comes from that user interface. So in the past, have meeting spaces or collaboration spaces been too complex from a control point of view? We're seeing a lot of UC companies out there that lock down their user interface to ensure that you have that consistent user experience. Apple's another example with their devices. They have a consistent user experience. Do we need to go more down that path and create something that's a lot more consistent and uniform, rather than having sort of very bespoke interfaces and that are potentially complex?
I say yes, and I think that I say yes, it's been too complicated for too long, and we should simplify in general. And I actually think that that's another reason that audiovisual design professionals should be involved in these projects as early as possible. Because if you're not there to talk about the user experience and what is the implication of building a room where I have 2 tower PCs, a DVD player, a VCR, a cassette deck, an HDMI plug-in, a VGA plug-in, and also a cable TV box. If you're not in the room to be the expert who says, that's stupid, you need 1/10 of that and you can simplify the controls this way if you cut X, Y, and Z, someone's going to do it. Someone's going to install it. And then you're going to end up with a Crestron panel with every single button on a Time Warner remote control duplicated on the Crestron panel, which is something I have literally seen more times than I'd care to count. So yeah, we absolutely should be reducing the systems in these rooms. And part of that is intelligent design to make sure that, not every room has to be fully multi-purpose. Some rooms can just be a screening room. Some rooms can just be a telepresence room.
Yeah. So I completely agree. Nick. Having this concept of whether it's connectors or button pushes is really important. And, for example, at Blue Jeans, we constantly look at how our mobile apps work. And a user of our technology said, hey, I can't get into a Blue Jeans meeting on my mobile application without doing at least 3 clicks. And we're like, wait, we purposely designed that to reduce the minimum amount of, to minimize the amount of clicks. And that's why we came out recently with the mobile Webrtc functionality as an additional project. And that's something that we use all the time now. And it's this concept of like, the trade-offs between overcomplicated, but there might be some requirements of why it's overcomplicated versus the end user just needing to get into a damn meeting or a damn event.
So
I'm sorry. Back when I was an integrator, we would do touch panels and designs, and we would always put in like the basic, simplest, get it going sort of interface as the default. And then if we had a power user that like knew what they were doing and could route signals easier and could use all the extra buttons, we'd give them a password, or we would let them into like the hidden menu, not the one from the manufacturer's hidden menu, but our hidden menu that they could then, be a power user and do their thing. But I mean, literally the first thing they told me when I was hired at my current position was, look, we've got conference rooms around the world, thousands of them. Every single one of them is different. Every single one of them has a different control system, not just manufacturer, but the touch panels, all the buttons are different. Nobody knows how to use anything, even sometimes within the same building. We want to make it so that our president of our company can go to any site and know how to use a meeting room.
So
it's hard.
Why aren't we deploying voice then? I mean, there was last year, 2020 in the US, 35 million smart speakers were sold. We don't seem to have a problem deploying them in the home to control our household. So why aren't, that's as frictionless as you'll get, right? Like talking to a smart speaker to control the environment. Why aren't we seeing that? I mean, should we be deploying voice technologies or voice control?
That's easy. The response is trust. Having trust and faith in the company that's on the back of that smart speaker is the number one thing. Even when I was at Crestron, there was a residential products. Everyone want to incorporate Alexa, but there's another company called Josh.ai, which told you that your data is your data. We're not going to do anything with your data, right? So as a large company, specific to your example earlier, a bank, I don't think a bank is going to want Alexa smart speakers and have Amazon listening to it in the background, because everyone, at the end of the day, no one really trusts Amazon with their stuff, right?
Surely you trust them with your credit card when you order online. Sure.
Right. Right. So there's levels of trust, right? Like, I'll swipe it, I'll get my money back, but how do I know he's not listening to my conversation about what I'm going to order chutney, for her food, right? So it gets complicated.
Have you ever noticed when you've had a private conversation, you jump on social media, suddenly there's an ad for something you holiday? Like, yeah.
Right.
Just
for me, I'm okay with it, right? Because, to me, I'm a conspiracy theorist, so I think the government's always listening to me. So it doesn't matter. But trying to prove that to a board of directors, like, hey, I need a budget to put an Alexa speaker in every single room. You're going to have a debate for the whole year. Just for what? That small speaker to prove what, right? So it depends on your organization, depends on your privacy concerns of your organization, and depends on how much effort you want to put into convincing others in your company that you need this voice solution in the space. Is it a cool idea for me? Yeah, it's cool. I would love to come into and be like, Alexa, start the meeting. Let's get Boogie, and it starts the meeting, right? That would be amazing to me.
So you don't think that we'll start seeing Alexa shows, $150 Alexa shows in a meeting space, in a collaboration space, rather than $1,000 touch panel anytime soon?
No, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
I think eventually, once somebody in some company convinces their management that it's okay, or do a pilot, and there's more information out there, then it'll just start snowballing later. But until it gets there, I don't think that's going to be anytime soon.
Yeah, it's something that we answered at Blue Jeans. Like, there was a question actually in the Q&A tab that specifically talked around voice-controlled speakers. And, does this technology exist today? Yeah. Actually, Blue Jeans and Zoom and, I can imagine a number of other providers have done that 5 years ago. It just proved to be too difficult because you get into shared spaces where someone doesn't know how to say Alexa or doesn't know how to say Siri or any of these other voice-activated commands. And now you get into a shared space where, is to your point, Pete, inside our own homes, that is a contained environment. That is a singular environment.
Mm-hmm. You, you do realize every time you mention Alexa and Hey Google and Siri that everyone's smart speakers are being set off.
We're trying to do that on purpose.
Okay, all right.
Mine's in the other room. It's cool. But yeah, so, I mean, exactly what Sharath and Rob said, you know, it's one thing. I don't care if I'm sitting at home by myself watching Schitt's Creek and suddenly I get a bunch of pop-up ads on my phone for, you know, the Schitt's Creek colored pencils that all have clever names that relate to the show. I don't care. But unlike Sharath's year-long debate to getting Alexas in the buildings, I know it would be a year of laughter coming from the IT and cyber security sections at my company if I even mentioned the A word or the S word or any of those other virtual assistants in our environment. They would not even consider something like that. But I have hope someday someone, and maybe it'll be those guys bringing out a new version, or maybe it'll be another company entirely, will say, hey, this is a brilliant idea. Let's find a way to use encryption and security to have a voice activation that can be used in the financial world, in the healthcare world, in the government or defense world, you know, places where these things are not happening.
So I think there's two other things to add to that. I agree with everything everyone just said. First of all, Sharath, just because you're paranoid, that doesn't mean they're not following you, just for the record. But two other things to add to that. Aside from all the concerns that everybody listed, these devices right now, they're designed and manufactured for home network use. Generally speaking, when you put them on an enterprise network, they just don't work. They rely on being in a smaller environment. They blast out, you know, multicast or various other things that they do that will just absolutely cause chaos on an enterprise network. So it's not just on the end users, it's also on the people who produce this to produce a better version for enterprise. The second point is the user experience is candidly not that good. Like, they sell it as a very natural language approach and you can say anything. Have you ever tried saying anything to your Google or Alexa that's slightly off the script that it's expecting? Like, even me trying to get it to turn on my kids' bedroom lights, sometimes it will take 2 or 3 times before it understands which light I'm talking about. Now, extend that into a non-tech savvy CIO trying to start a meeting that might be synced to 2 different rooms and 2 different calendars. It's a disaster. That technology is absolutely. It's a cool technology that, again, nowhere near ready for enterprise use as far as I've seen.
So what about other consumer grade technologies, Nick? I mean, we're seeing for quite some time, we've seen sort of $70 webcams being deployed and so on. I mean, is that a good thing? Is that trend a good thing for our industry? Does it have a place?
I think it's good for the peripheral companies. I mean, but in our industry, I mean, almost every laptop, every phone has some level of camera built into it, some level of microphone built into it. There are absolutely laptops and phones that do not have that stuff, in particular because of privacy reasons. But look, let's call it for what it is. Logitech is just eating away at the market right now with their USB cameras, their USB microphones, never mind their keyboards and mice. They're you know, what did they have, like you know, 5th quarter in a row of revenue? I mean, record. It's absurd. But again, I think that's the whole industry, whether it's the service providers, whether it's the peripheral devices providers. What I think is struggling here is the purpose-built room systems, right? The Polycoms, the Cisco, like the ones that are traditionally in conference rooms. Look, no one's in the office, right? So what does that do to that segment of the marketplace?
I think it's overall. I think it's overall a good thing, but I think it's a trend that you need to be super cautious about, because what it really represents is a trade-off of quality for convenience. And in a lot of cases, you know, I think there's room for that trade-off in a fair number of the systems and the peripherals that we're talking about. But it'll cross a line. It'll absolutely cross a line where, you know, the gain in convenience is no longer worth it, or you're sacrificing crucial functionality for voice control, for example, or some other, you know, quality of life convenience improvement that's not significantly beneficial to the user. You know, I say this talking to you from my Logitech Brio with my Logitech keyboard and Logitech mouse, and having just, signed off on building a few more rooms that are using Logitech peripherals. I think it's great, and I think it's, for building at scale and at distance with, lean resources, it's really helpful. Doesn't mean it's better. I still would generally prefer to put a PoE Dante native Shure microphone on the table instead of a Logitech. It's not to say that the Logitech won't do the job, but I trust the Shure microphone for a lot of other applications a little bit more.
So who's making those decisions, Nick, then? I mean, you mentioned before quality versus convenience. You talk about things like wireless headphones. These kinds of products tend to or can create a lot of problems from a user's point of view. Where do we draw the line, and who is making the call on what can or what should and shouldn't be deployed?
So ultimately, who makes the call is the person that signs the checks. And that's why I think Sharath's point not all that long ago about do your research, write a report, make sure that everyone up the chain from you is aware of your findings on what's the benefit of this and what's the cost of this. Be clear, be super detailed, be super clear, and also, quite frankly, have a fallback position. We all know what the best and the right thing to do in this room is. We all also know that probably someone has talked to your CIO about a cheaper solution. So be aware of what's out there, tell people what you think is best, but be prepared to compromise within reason.
Yeah, and sorry, Don, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'll slightly disagree with Nick. I don't necessarily think it's always the money guy, but it's the money guy's subject matter expert, because they get so much money coming through their desk and they have to spend it on all kinds of things they don't know what they're talking about because they studied finance in school.
Right.
And, yeah, they can go to the CIO and the CEO and the CFO and everybody and show them this cool, shiny thing that's a lower cost. But then they turn around and come back to my AV team and they ask us, hey, what's the benefit of this versus the one that we're already specifying? And, we're the ones that ultimately make the decision, balancing that cost savings of this product versus our end user actually needs these features, which is not available here. So if you're an integrator and you're watching this, find the people like me at all of the big companies you want to work with, because they're starting to hire us out of the AV industry. And so we're not clueless. And if you're friendly with us, we'll be your best friend.
Yeah.
And if you're in-house like me, find your CIO and become their subject matter expert. Don't let that be someone else.
Yeah, and I think part of the conversation of future collaboration is also the change of the working landscape to becoming hybrid. So companies need to start providing their new people, their onboarding with a camera, with a headset, right? And if that's the case, then HR gives you a whole thing. You get a Logitech camera, you get a Logitech headset, but when you come in the office, we're going to use better equipment for the office spaces, right? So you could do it both ways, right? Like, hey, let's get all the Logitech stuff for all of our users so they can work from home. They have a good camera, they have a good headset with good microphones, right? So that's the future of collaboration, is providing solutions for in office and also out of the office, right? I mean, at the end of the day, when I was at Crestron, I told every end user at companies that all their people need a Mercury on their desk at home. Is it overkill? Yeah, but it was a solution that they could apply. So that's the future collaboration, is understanding what equipment they need in office and out of office and having them seamlessly work together so there's no friction between coming into the office. Because if I know there's a piece of hardware in the office that I have no idea how to use, I'm going to avoid that office, right? Without a doubt.
Absolutely.
And Sharath, what are some current technologies that aren't being deployed that should or could be implemented now in the workplace or in a collaboration space?
I think artificial, AR is awesome, because you have all these. Our iPhone 12s have amazing cameras on them. Why not say, hey, here's a Crestron panel. Use your camera to see how it looks like on the wall, right? Or here's a credenza. Point it towards the wall and see how it looks on the credenza. Oh, flip a different color. Oh, swipe to your right. Look at the color scheme, right? So now you get the architects, you get the interior designers involved, and they're choosing colors. You can show them that, their wallpaper will not clash with the TV that's on the wall, and then that conversation starts. So I think AR is definitely usable, especially with hardware such as iPhones and Android phones and Samsungs, and so much opportunity for AR.
Okay. Some good thoughts there. Look, we need to start wrapping things up, but I have one more question for the whole panel. The phrase that I hate the most is, "That's the way we've always done it." What is it going to take to change the mindset of these people, these traditionalists who want to roll things out the way that they've done it? I mean, they've previously done it. I mean, technology moves so quick. So what is it going to take to, is it education? Do you need to prove it to them? I mean, what is it? It's open to the whole panel.
I think it's a combination. Go ahead, Don.
I was going to let you talk, but I think it's a combination of education and, just letting people know there are other options. I'm 4 years in at this current position, and there's still a whole lot of, well, this is how we always did rooms. This is how we always made them go. And it has taken me this long to educate, hey, facilities, you now have an AV subject matter expert that you can come to instead of just Googling microphones and speakers to put in a space. Or IT guys, you no longer have to go out of your wheelhouse and do AV and do the buying. I actually know what the AVIXA standards are. I actually know what the IT AVIXA, collaboration efforts are. I can help you with these things. And so you're not making it up as you go along. Hey, end users, not only are we putting this new system in with new technology, I'm going to show you how it works because that's part of my job as your in-house AV person, as your in-house AV staff. So, every company should hire someone like me for their own companies. So they have someone internal, but you just have to educate. You have to reach out to your customers and say, this is the way things are now. Here's how much it'll save you. People love numbers. And if you can give them return on investment, here's what it's going to save you in time. Here's what it's going to save you in money. Here's why you're going to have a competitive edge over your customers by using this. Speak in those words and don't tell them about your gray box. They will love you.
I think it's avoiding. Rob, you're up.
I think it's a combination, like Don said. But historically, we've learned as a culture and a society that what we're doing today or what we did 2 years ago isn't necessarily the best way. Mm-hmm. It's very much, an evolution. And I think this goes back to, the IT teams or security teams inside of a company that are deciding what technologies their end users or their customers leverage, and making sure that they're educated on the tools that are out and available now. Don't get comfortable. Make sure that you understand what those tools can be used for, which ones are better. But as an IT team or a security team, make sure you ask your end users, your customers, what they want to leverage and have them have a seat at the table when you're making your decisions.
Mm-hmm. I just want to extend what Dawn said. I think that numbers are great. Talking about return on investment and cost is great. That's one hurdle you absolutely have to clear. She also said, don't tell me about your gray box, which is super, super relevant. AV engineers, learn to talk about this in terms of experience and not a parts list. Learn to talk about this in terms of, well, if you let me change the system in this room, this is what it will improve. This is the experience that you will get as a result. Nobody cares about the boxes. Nobody cares about the SKUs except us. So keep that out of the conversation. Talk about it in terms of return on investment on improvement to the experience.
Yeah. I just think just talking about it to anyone and everyone, right? I talk about it to everyone I see on technology, right? Well, I mean, I might start a TikTok channel soon of showing AR stuff, right? I might put more stuff on LinkedIn. So I think the more us as a group of educated, smart people in the technology fields, we just need to put all this information out there and understand that there are options for their spaces. So for me, networking. It's not a certain thing. It's just networking, meeting people, meeting end users, meeting clients, talking to them, talking about their issues, and then understanding what their issues are, then using what I learned from them and providing it to my clients. So networking.
Excellent. Well, some great advice there. Well, that wraps up our Power Hour from AVIXA. I just wanted to say thank you to our 4 panel members, to AVIXA, and in particular to Blue Jeans for sponsoring this event. We greatly appreciate it. We hope everyone who is listening got something out of it. I believe there's a number of questions that have come through on the chat, and we'll endeavour to respond to those questions as soon as we can. But that's it for this Power Hour, and I'll hand it back to Annette at AVIXA.
Thanks, Pete, and thank you to all of our speakers for the conversation today. That was fantastic. Particularly thank you to our listeners for joining us. I saw a question in the chat about part 2, and we will be doing this Power Hour again next month. We're going to be talking about troubleshooting conferencing systems on Monday, February 8th, same time, 1 p.m. Eastern. Please go to avixa.org/webinars to find that and sign up for it. We'd love to see you there. Thank you again to BlueJeans for sponsoring this series. We're going to have the recording from this conversation available at that same website, avixa.org/webinars, within about 5 business days, and your 1 RU credit will show up on your transcript within the next week as well. If you have any trouble, please contact us at webinars@avixa.org. Thank you again to Pete, Rob, Dawn, Nick, and Sharath for sharing their insights today. Hope you enjoyed, and enjoy the rest of your week, everyone.